Thanks, folks. I mean, it's great. Thank you so much. I know it takes time for you guys to come here. I love having my family, peeps in my life just here, and it's just a different vibes. It's just so we can actually look at the work and I can talk. I didn't even get a chance to see the work last night, really. For some of you guys who were here, we were just so packed. So anyway, and thanks to Brian, who had kind of like, we kind of rediscovered this work in some ways because it has been very in the past. You know, this work was made 30 years ago, I would say, but never get a chance to really be shown together, you know, in this kind of context. I think at most there were like 5 pieces here and there, and it only existed in slides. And, you know, I mean, it was submitted to grants and fellowships and jobs, but really we were just in constant transition, and I was in between so many different projects that I really didn't get a chance to really invest my time in kind of like showing the work. So I'm just grateful. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
And this work, I'll say, you know, so like this talk is just casual. You guys can jump in and have questions. I'd be happy to answer you in terms of ideas or like materials and kind of practice in terms of photography. But I think about this kind of work, it's really interesting because when I look at this work, I wouldn't call these like masterful photographs, you know what I mean? Because when I look at this is when I really didn't know anything about photography. I had just left New York. I was running a nightclub like right up the road called MK, you know, it was like this, I just need to get away from New York. And I landed in New Mexico, which is like this place that's just completely out of nowhere. And fortunately, at that particular moment, I discovered writing by Mishima, which is this Japanese writer who, you know, a gay writer living in Japan, but he was like so concerned about his representation as like this hyper male. And then another person that I was really influenced by is Sang Kwan-chi. Again, the same sort of concern in terms of gender and like self-representation in terms of an Asian American, you know, Asian Western kind of like a person. So that's what I think this work is about. It's about that kind of reference, that kind of complex navigation in terms of gender representation. On the one hand, as an Asian American, and I want to emphasize Asian American, because at that moment, they were just this generic Asian person. It's not Japanese, it's not Korean American, you know what I mean? It's like Asian American. There's this complex thing where you like, on the one hand, you like this badass Bruce Lee Kung Fu monk, you know? And then on the other side, you have this kind of like wispy, kind of asexual, emasculated male that is easily pushed around and kind of like this kind of more submissive sort of like person. So that was something that I was really struggling with and thinking about how do you deal with that. It's not about being a victim, right? It's like, for me, it's just, I just found this space where it's just so rich to explore. And thanks to work that was done before me, of course, you know, like Sang Kwan-chi, writing by Margot Machida, I was really introduced to this kind of complex question. And for the first time that in my life that I thought, oh my gosh, you know, there's like a whole crew of people that actually work with this. It's not something that it was like only me who was like trying to struggle with. So this, it's kind of like a typical why I started with this piece. It means a lot to me actually. Is at the time my girlfriend just announced that she's pregnant, like that day. And I was like, you know what, Elan, let's be real artists. Let's go to the studio and make like the first piece together. So that night we made our first piece. And there was no resources, literally we went into a classroom, we moved everything out of the classroom. We staged this hot light, which is, you know, if you've done photography, you wouldn't do that kind of stuff. And so we made this piece. And I remember I was just so in love with that process of just like being spontaneous, I guess, right? It's like, okay, let's just do it. And before I get my grants, of course, I didn't get like the really good fake breasts, you know what I'm saying? So like, yeah, let's just like, how do we deal with this? Okay, let's do paper cut because we're thinking about, oh, let's just do buto, like a Japanese dance, where we can reinterpret this kind of, Adam and Eve from the Jan van Eyck, from like the like pretty relatively well-known, art historical piece. And so that's what we were thinking about, right? So like, how do you deal with being both the male and the female? And then it's interestingly enough, looking at Beijing opera, looking at, Buto. I mean, there's just so many times where like this performer would actually like both male and female at the same time. And then I was just thinking about a few things when you're thinking about where would I find my place in Western culture and like what that grand narrative means to me as an Asian person. Where do I see myself? So Adam and Eve, I see both. But then what are the signifier of somebody who's actually fully assimilated? So I was thinking, looking at this kind of like toe curling, if you really look closely at the Jan van Eyck painting, there's a certain kind of like signature thing that I just thought it was just so odd, right? So that's what I was thinking about. And let's see, I want to keep the image really super simple. And what I was really enamored with was just the process of this whole thing. I was taking Beijing opera classes. I was doing buto dances. I was going to the gym like all the time, like working out 4 hours a day, just like, so yeah, I mean, now I don't look like that, but if you look, it's like, so that was like very much influenced by Mishima sort of writing, just like the idea of how you put on a mask, how do you actually represent yourself as this like hyper male warrior, even though, Mishima is about as gay as like you can get, in the way that why he started working out is during one of his dance with this transgender person, she's like, oh my God, you feel like tofu, until he started working out and gets like super buff. But anyway, so dealing with that, and what I was thinking about too of this work, as I have 30 years now to like look back at this particular work, I think about this work as nothing but like really bad forgery. I think about them not as images, but as objects. Objects such as, when you look at a Renaissance painting, it's not just the image that you're looking at, but really it's the frame, it's actually the museum tag as well. So I think about that, and how do you subvert that? How do you translate it in a way that is still authentic to the idea, but just so inauthentic to like what you're trying to do? In terms of like what I'm talking about is culture, right? It's like no matter how I try, I'm not gonna be as Asian. I mean, I can be both. Asian Americans, like, yeah, you're both, but then at the same time, you are so not both, because you're not authentic. So I think about these objects as that attempt to just deal with like the inauthenticity of my experience. So let's see, makeup, all of that. I have to give credit. This is not my work really, but I think it's a truly collaborative kind of project. I have this gift, I think, that I can con people. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm like, okay, let's do something like really silly. And somehow people really trust me to do these silly things. So, so like Elan was so amazing. I mean, she was not going to be like the mother of my child, but she also became like this partner in this particular project. I had Dylan McDaniel, who was like my student at the time. We didn't know how to operate a camera, a 4x5 camera. So we learned together, and I have another person named John Donald. So that was a crew that I would be working with. And I love that because it takes a certain kind of authorship away from what I was thinking about, right? So like, if John was to shoot my work, John had a little bit of like a shift in like his perspective comparing to Dylan. And so I was hoping that this is how the dynamic of the work can be maintained and not being so stagnant, right? So let's see, what else was I gonna say? Oh yeah, and then I think it's, the process of for me, the memory, it's like about working out, about going to class, and then, at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, going to get cigarettes at the 7-Eleven, and like coming into 7-Eleven looking like this. There was just like this really, it's a truly like a spectacle, right? But it was so amazing because for the first time, I can tell you, before as in like say like the submissive Asian, it's kind of interesting, you're like a nobody, you're invisible. And I remember when I start bartending here in the East Village, and I start managing MK, which is, where Basquiat and all of those people were, there is this empowerment that you begin to feel. And I think having that experience in New York, I want to translate it into this work that is, it's not claiming myself to be the victim, but then to really celebrate and just thinking about like the whole complex nature of being enriched in this liminal space where you can have freedom to explore gender, you can have the freedom to explore race, you can have all of these things. And I just embrace that freedom and then make that a spectacle, really. So that was the conception, I guess, of my first son, Asia. It's a long story. But I remember just going into the darkroom that night to develop my film. And, at the time, folks here in New York was like, people, you got to come back and run my nightclub or whatever. And I'm like, you know what, please, God, let this be. I'm not going to be a poser anymore. I'm going to start being a real artist this time, right? So that's how it began. And then I guess we can move to that piece there now.
I think about spectacle a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really interesting because a lot, this is obviously a very serious work, but I think in a lot of ways it's also incredibly unserious.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Satirical, especially when you're talking about gender.
Absolutely.
You are literally wearing like paper clothes
right.
on your body. Like it's funny.
Right,
And
right.
It's like kind of makes a mockery of the idea of gender, which is really interesting too. But I'm curious if that was part of your intention.
Well, you know what? I call this a tragic comedy.
Yeah, sure.
Right? It's like right off the bat, this work is a tragic comedy. It's not to be taken serious, but at the same time, extremely serious. You should take it. So I think that's where I want to maintain the work. It's just that really thin line that divides what's really funny and what's really sad. And I think that's when that line, if that can be maintained, that ambiguous nature of the work, I think I really want to be in that particular spot, right? So, so like the work is kind of autobiographical, right? Sort of, because it deals with my assimilation into the West. But then at the same time, I think I begin to like invent myth and all of that stuff that I, along the way. So with this, it was just amazing because when you have a kid, then you can use a kid as a model. You know what I'm saying? So this is Asia when he was 3 years old. 3 months old. And what is really, if you look closely at this particular image, it's so in this contemporary time, it's actually like so wrong, right? Because there's this Vietnamese man, but this putting on a dress, but this is actually a Korean dress. You know what I mean? So that authenticity is completely questioned. I love to embrace that at that particular time, because when I think about how I was being addressed, you can't really tell the difference if I'm Japanese, I'm Vietnamese, or so I really try to do that, just kind of like globs everything together. So while I'm doing Beijing opera, I'm also, doing other things that are not really authentic. So like the movement, whatever. Let's see. I think, it's looking at this work now, it's kind of interesting because, I think about Lucas Samaras, right? There's this man who used a Polaroid, and create this kind of private theater within his kitchen in New York, where he just go and he just do this little crazy performance. And in many ways, it just feels like this is what the work is about. And the work doesn't, at the time, what I was really trying to focus on is like to be somewhat away from this particular types of work that claim itself to be a victim, right? It's like, oh my God, it's like I'm Vietnamese, I got shot in the war, blah, 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 blah. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just like make that step where I'm actually can neutralize those kind of expectations. So in one hand, you know, this could be interpreted as like, you know, the nurturing side, or when I'm expected to be this submissive Asian, this, you know, I would just do the gender, and I know I may not be correct or what have you when we're talking about it in this day and age, but I think about being like, say, a woman, right? But so I want to adopt a submissive kind of surface, but I want to subvert it by like turning that woman, say, into Medusa, right? So like it's no longer submissive. You know, it's something that just like is terrifying because the strength is, you know, it's like you look at her and then all of a sudden you turn to stone. So, and then when I look at the work too, I want to keep things like super simple. I want to keep the flat space of a typical Asian space in terms of paintings and such. That's why they like really pitch black, like theatrical. That's why they made, okay, there's not much space that's moving in between them. And if you look at them closely, a lot of this doesn't follow the structure of a Western kind of painting. For instance, I did a piece like, say, The Blind Leading the Blind, which is Bruegel, The Blind Leading the Blind. But instead of moving from left to right, I constructed them going from right to left. So there's a lot of these rules that I was thinking I need to challenge, right? It needs to be challenged. And so I think, so in some ways I was playful, but I think they are actually pretty calculated, you know what I mean? Because I think like I was working a lot with painters. And I was really fortunate to work with this person named David Hickey. I don't know if you know David Hickey, but you know, he won the Genius Award for being like an art critic, and just like to be in his class and to be able to get so critical about examining like art objects. I think that's like some of those things are like a result of, you know, that the time that I was studying in that in the desert, really, in New Mexico. And I think if I had been here in New York, it would have been really different. But the fact that I think because I was so far away from everything, it didn't matter like what I was trying to do. I just trying to do whatever that seems great and fun and silly. But I would have to say that I also was so fortunate to be in class at school with Robert Parky Harrison, which is like, you know, amazing, you know, Joe Peter Wickens. I mean, these like really giant of like the photographic practice. So whenever I think about this work, I don't really claim that I come up with these ideas. Yeah, I'm just like influenced by like so many different people. I can tell you, I can look at this work, this type of work, and I can see the simplicity of Sang Quan Chi's work. I can see the Joe Peter Wickens kind of like weird, like emotional kind of references. And I can see the romantic kind of reference and nature of Robert and Shanna Parky Harrison, right? So like at the time, I was just like a sieve. I just tried to just get everything into my practice. And I feel like that's how I was able to differentiate myself a little bit. I think, you know, with this particular body of work, what it is like the lack of resources and the limited amount of accessibility to stuff. It forced us, meaning like myself and like my three other members, to be really resourceful with what we had, right? So for instance, I just want to talk briefly, you know, we came in, it was graduate school, there's nothing to work with, but like we came into the classroom at midnight, move everything out of the classroom. I get a roll of, you know, wallpaper, roll it out. So like everything just seems so haphazard, you know what I mean? The makeup is not really that great. I mean, I didn't even shave my legs. You know, it's like, there's like so many of these different details that, you know, I would have refined, or I would have left it because it's just kind of interesting to look at. And what it is it's really just this makeshift sort of like situation where you have to work within your own limitation. Therefore, you just try to come up with all of these ideas to just like kind of a shortcut. I mean, for us to go and rent out like a little opera glass like this costs money that it has to be recycled into like something else, right? And this idea is, well, what I really wanted to do is to reveal the process, right? I mean, didn't want to do this piece where, you know, we could have done it like seamlessly. We could have cut, we could have pasted, but I really want to do this as something that is to kind of reveal the process, to think about like, you know, this is like, we don't try to be 3 different person, but this is like 3, you know, it's like one person trying to like play all these different roles. The space doesn't really fit in like seamlessly, but that's how we like it. And I think this is such a good example of what I think about an object from that particular moment of time, right? The Ghent altarpiece or something where you can actually open this. This is Susanna and the Elder. So basically, Susanna is this woman, you know, she's really pious. She's like a good person. Her husband is away. And while he's away, then these like really dirty old men are just like, you know, really trying to, you know, get fresh with her. So it's just all about like being voyeuristic. It's all about like submissive. It's all about like, you know, defending like the gaze. And so that's what I was thinking about in this piece here. And, you know, this is definitely like a Beijing opera, kind of like, you know, gesture. And then I really want to bring that in clashing and, you know, bring little details that's like extremely Western and try to bring in this work. I would say, yeah, but like what I really appreciate, like I had mentioned before, is just like how spontaneous we were able to do this, even though it was kind of slightly calculated. But you know what? We had one light, right? So like one light, let's just make sure this works, and then we bring another light over here. We have 4 hours to shoot before like we have to take everything out so that the next day the class can begin again. So that's a kind of, but we had so much fun. What it was just a true celebration. I mean, we go into the studio, into the space, and it just seems like we just had a party. You know, everything was just like pure joy, it was just so fun. And somehow we just get work done like really fast. And I have to say, from the moment that I prayed that I would be serious about my life being an artist, to how fast like this project was recognized, kind of like really like nationally, was so quick. I mean, I tend to do things in the way that it's so illegal, you know what I mean, so immoral. So within like the first year of this work, first 2 years, I applied to the NEA grant. And when you're a student, you can't do that. But you know, we were so broke, who cares, you know? So I applied, and I got the NEA, right? And I thought was, you know, we get that grant, we get the money, it's great. Now we have to answer to people like next year. But then after that, like right after that year, they canceled like the whole NEA program. And so I barely got away with, you know, the NEA. So the point was that at that moment, we were just like trying to do everything that was, you know, really everything that was like really possible. And through this project, I think that's when I was able to get a teaching job, you know, like with all of these things. And I think that's one of the things that I want to mention is that during this particular moment in time, because it's so old, everything exists in slides. Access to work is really difficult. You don't go on a website. Things just seems to be really limited, you know? So I would be curious, and I think this is also what happened too. See, they were like trying to get away from this. No, you guys can't get away from this. What was I gonna say is, about teaching. Yeah, you know, and I also have realized that at this moment in time, this work was not finished, but I was working and I was moving, and that's when I transitioned into another project, which is like the Cowboy, another Western project. And so looking back through like every project that I have done so far, yes, they're all based on like the same kind of idea, but the appearance have changed so much that it just seems like, this person is so chaotic. And so I think about, I'm just so project driven and not trying to establish like a brand or something like that. I just felt like my creativity is just so important that I cannot stay with one project. And that's why I really wanted to do something with this work that every piece speaks of like a different kind of nuance of like the complexity of these ideas, you know what I mean? Because I don't think this work is about something, but I think this work is about thinking about the questions about that thing, even though I didn't have, like for instance, this is about like, gender, what have you, and I think like the Dante would just, I mean, my family is here, so they actually understand this, but Dante was like, even though it's a Western myth, but then I insert myself, my autobiographical kind of details into that. It's because, I escaped a bomb by like 4 minutes, I mean, you know that Yinini, right? I mean, my dad asked me I supposed to stay at my uncle's house for the New Year's Eve, but my dad, like the last 5 minutes before midnight, which is like the curfew, he whisked me away, told me I had to go home the next day. A bomb dropped on like that house, killed everybody. So it was like a really complex narrative to really talk about it. And I don't want to be like a victim or anything like that. But then I thought Dante would have been a great myth for me to weave myself in terms of like how I can talk about my personal narrative without making it, I don't know, I mean like, a spectacle, so anyway, so that's why if you look at closely, I have a few pieces that explore kind of like Dante. I mean, I think they're about like 6 pieces. I think here we just have, that one, and yes. And another thing too, and we don't need to like turn the camera around, but I don't know if you notice, like everything, I want to make sure that the work is really artificial. You know what I mean? If you look at the floor, it's like stage. If I have a cutaway side, then it's all about like the staging, So like, because of the limitation of like the staging and of the space, how do we think about, the upper space and like the lower space, and what would happen if, we would cut that space away, and then thinking about the objects that can occupy that space in between. And that's what I was really trying to explore, right?
Yeah, and that was the next picture I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So let's move.
This particular one, what I was really thinking about is, as this Asian person coming into the West, what would be my relationship with the original sin? You know what I mean? It's like, what? I mean, is that like my deal? It's like, what the heck is that? So just thinking about reconstructing this, like really like simple, kind of really minimal, kind of still life, and then trying to find my space within it. So, this is like, of course, like, my bow head, you can see that. And, just like thinking about like the compressed, just thinking about like the roots that's growing out, so it's not about like a statement about my relationship, but just questioning like where that space is. And it gives me a chance actually to construct a still life, right? So like in this, I just love the fact that I was able to like locate this thing, get a plastic apple, what have you. And what is really interesting for me here is for the first time, I'm starting to bring in personal kind of like details. So for instance, the opium poppies, it's like, it comes into like so many of this work. And for me, the opium poppies is, it's like, I mean, it's so autobiographical just because, East Village, 1980s. But then at the same time, the opium poppies is also like that one thing that goes back and forth between the East and the West. So if you see like like the opium, like the cultivation over here, it brings back over there. And then, there's also like, they like symbolic for learning and like wisdom and all of that. So that's why I play with that quite often.
It also makes me think of your cyanotype series.
Yes,
that you did in
absolutely.
Monet's Garden.
Absolutely. And I'm just like, Poppy, you know, Poppy, I just can't keep my hands away from those things.
And was
because-
that project in France
Yes.
after this?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
it was. It was. I mean, initially, that project in France, I received that particular grant to do this project at Monet's Garden. And my initial proposal is to have the Magnificent Seven fighting with the Seven Samurai. But you know, but by the moment I landed in France, I realized I could do something that addressed something more complex. But anyway, yeah. So that's, you know, so like that's, I have a few, you know, still life. But like I think this one here, I think it's just like the simplicity of just a snake and the apple, and how do I actually, you know, construct that. But like what I want and what I was really intrigued is, you know, it's just that space in between also, right? You know, if it's like really a stage, you should be able to see through this stage. And then what can you do with that kind of space in between? So it's not really apparent here, but like when I do like say, you know, the three wise men or three wise guys, or like the blind leading the blind, when the space is arranged, when there's like 5 pieces or 3 pieces next to each other, it's really interesting to look at this particular space and how the relationship of like the upper and how they kind of insert, and kind of like, you know, how do they interact with each other. That's what I was really interested in.
And this idea of a stage is prevalent in almost every single
yes.
picture in the series.
Yes. Yeah, it's just like, it's all about the artificial nature of just assimilating, right? I mean, like I had mentioned again, for those of you, you know, you guys who just like kind of came in, it's really, this is all about like a bad job at forging something, you know. It's like, back when I was thinking about it, you know, like back at that particular moment in time, if you look at, say, Cindy Sherman, sort of a Renaissance work. If you look at Muramura, Japanese photographer who actually, you know, restaging these classical paintings as well. I was just thinking about like, you know, all of us, if we keep doing this, one day when you walk into a museum, you have no idea what would be the real object anymore. And that's just so amazing to be able to subvert that narrative that somehow you try to fit in, you know. Now you can actually like make these things where people actually have to pay attention and to follow. Yeah. Okay, so I can talk about like technical thing too as well, you know. It's like just so if you guys practice, you know, you practice photography. I mean, these are all traditional kind of printing, right? So black and white in the darkroom, it takes me a day. Like it takes me like, you know, this last summer I go in at 3:30 in the morning and I print, and then I get done by like maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? But I just forgot how time consuming and crazy that particular process is. But then at the same time, it was just so amazing to be able to like do that practice again. So they black and white, and doing this work 30 years later, the paper doesn't respond the same way as what the kind of paper that I used to use before. And trust me, when I was doing, you know, I learned photography, I learned to do this at 92nd Street Y, and I literally would be sitting in the subway with a box of paper that say Oriental. I mean, that's what I use. I use Oriental paper, right? But they don't make that paper anymore. So you know, to do it again, it's kind of like, you know, it's interesting. And then the framing to me is like super special too. I mean, they have to be, I mean, you know, they are really custom. They like really, of the framing that we did, this frame came from, you know, 30 years ago, but like those frames, I actually worked with a woodworker. We come up with like 3 different profiles. I talk about reinterpretation of classical frames, and we really work to fabricate. So like in the end, if you see like the little slight slanted piece, that's like the detail but I really want this piece to actually float away from the walls. So that's a part of these things about the objects that I think about. This frame here, it actually, it's painted and then wax on top. I mean, I made this particular frame here. So when I was doing this work, that's what I was thinking about. It's like, oh my God, it has to be like this whole object. In terms of this piece, all my friends are painters. I mean, I look at photography, yeah. I mean, I do. I certainly have my heroes. I'm so captivated by ideas more than images, but when I look at things, I look at paintings, all my friends are painters. I mean, if I go and see art, I go and I look at like how the surface is being painted. And this one here, it's actually different because this one here has Dolan wax on top. So it's a protective layer, but then at the same time, it gives me a chance to mimic the brushstroke of the surface of a painting as well. So if you look closely at a certain place, there is like little shift, and that's like really subtle, but like it kind of mimics this kind of painting surface. With this particular one, I've always been enamored by that weird Gabrielle Destré and one of her sisters from the Fontainebleau school. Just that thing, And as you can see, I get some grants, so I was able to get like a really good. It's no longer a cardboard piece, right? It's like, But then at the same time, I really want to reveal that no, it's not real, right? It's like it's all artificial. But so I would just kind of, but like I was never able to find like an elegant hand to do this piece. And I don't want to do my hand, it doesn't make sense until actually when I moved to Oregon and I had this one student who I thought, wow, her hand is just like really perfect. And so, so that's, but then if you look at this, it's such a weird thing because on one, there's like a Korean dress, but then over here, it started going to a kimono. So like, I just want to talk about, just like how not authentic, this person is. It's just like, I don't speak for a Vietnamese American experience. Actually, at the time, a lot of you guys don't know this, but it's like, I didn't use my last name. I mean, it's always Pipo. It was like always Pipo, never Nguyen-duy. I only came into Nguyen-duy maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But before that, it was just Pipo, because I didn't want my name to designate like specificity, right? And what else was I going to talk about in terms of, referencing, Well, anyway, I just felt like at some point I just really had to make this picture, and I really want to. I hate to point bad things out to Brian. It's my gallerist. I can't do that. But I just want to show you like how amateur, and how a lack of like photographic knowledge and just terrible of a photographer I was. Right? It's like because I could only afford one light. Right? So like there's a light coming in here, and if you guys do this, and I teach in class all the time, it's like, where's your hair light? Right? If you don't have a hair light, you're gonna have your head look like it's missing, right? So like, you can see like on this part here, if I had more money, would be like just one more light over here, just highlight this edge. But at the same time, I love that vibe you know what I'm saying? It's like not waiting until something is really perfect to work and just trying to really make do with what you have. And and so like, I don't know if I answered some of like the stuff that you're talking about, but like, I think that particular painting was just so weird that I really wanted to do it and translate it in the way that I thought was appropriate for this particular body of work.
And how many years did you work on this body of work?
I worked on this only for like 4 years. It's one of the shortest projects that I worked on. But I have to say too, because I did not know fully about my process. So I think my production was slow. But I think if I was to do this project now, I think I could have been so much more productive. Because, I mean, given the fact that, 30 pieces in like 4 years, I mean, that's not a lot, you know what I mean? But like, I think at the time I was just still learning about so many different things. I came down from, when I was in New York, I was a street photographer, So like all of this kind of changes, and having people who encouraged me to like do this kind of work, I think it took a while for me to get my vocabulary and my syntax down.
And doing sort of series-driven work, part of the learning process is knowing when the project's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was just never done. But like, I think we work enough with each other now that I can say, you know what, I do this thing in like, even though I jump through projects, but like I get really obsessive. So that, like say the hotel work is like, it's like so much, or like the greenhouse, I would push like everything like really far. And the same with this too, but I felt like as soon as I feel that I have mastered something, and it's a really stupid thing. It's a really stupid thing for an artist that work in this, like a market or something. I move on, I do something else. And I think that's when Elizabeth Leach got really mad at me, because she's just like, dude, you can't do this. Because I think I was just driving her crazy, because the moment I think that she built, at my young career, when she built me, worked with me with this project and that the Cowboy project, and all of a sudden I just started doing East of Eden. I think it was really frustrating for people to work with me at that stage.
Right, but it makes sense in terms of your curiosity
Yes.
and your motivations and what.
And what do I have fun with? I mean, I feel like I want to have fun with my work, and not necessarily just like repeating something that I had mastered.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this project is decades old,
Yes,
right, at this
yes.
point,
Mhm.
and I can't imagine.
Older than you.
Older than.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah.
And I can't imagine that it resonates the same with you, or was even printed the same way as it was when you first made it, or I don't know, has the grandeur that it has now than when you first made it, because you talk about all this amateurness. I'm just curious about how this project has shifted for you, if the meaning has changed, if it stayed the same, if your printing process changed.
Do you know what I mean? That's a great question, because I think about that when I was doing it. When I was doing this, I printed without any references to like the old work. I didn't look at what my old print looked like, but I actually printed that day doing that thing and making that decision in that moment, right? So like the consistency, no, I mean, it doesn't look consistent. I mean, some of the work did not look consistent as like how I had printed before. And I like that. I mean, in some ways I don't, but like in some ways I felt like through wisdom, through experience, how would I translate this now, right? So like that was really fresh. And then has the idea of this project changed? No, it has not. But my understanding of the project has definitely improved quite a bit, right? Because, all of these things that I think about, like authenticity of like the objects and all of those things, while I was doing it, I was so steep in that work that I was not able to think about it, right? And so for me now, 30 years later, I mean, it's like 30 years old, with like, with other projects that has like, overlay on top of this work. And even when you're not working, you're still thinking about it, that, right? So like, even not working on this project, I still think about it, off and on for the last 30 years. It just gives me a different kind of perspective. I don't think, I can't say it's like a better one or it's like the correct one. It just gives me a different perspective, and it just let me understand, it allows for me to kind of appreciate the nuances. And I think, and to appreciate the mistakes, and to appreciate the chance that I took doing this with this work, the chance that I'm like, oh my God, the question is like, okay, people, are you gonna cross-dress? Would you have that opportunity right now? Would you do the same work? I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you. But like at that point, yeah, I'd do it. You know what I'm saying? So I think it changed. But like, I think it just, yeah, my perspective is just a little bit more maybe like mature and try to understand that work. At the time, I think I would just like blindly, I think I would just, do you know what it is? I just want to, I love this quote, and it talks about the Sex Pistols, I know, it's kind of weird. But, and I think like what he acknowledges, like, the moment that Johnny Rotten read out like, like God Save the Queen, it was just like an attempt to make the loudest noise that you can. And that's youth to me. And I think that's what I was trying to do with this body of work at that moment in time. Because, I had just come from, Karen Black doing like work at the pyramids, I don't know. All of these folks that were just around me, they were just doing crazy things that so I felt like in some ways I was embracing that practice, right? It's about like the spectacle. It's about kind of like celebrating really, over a sudden it's like, wow, it's like, I get paid a lot to like standing around and do nothing, at, that MK club or what have you. It's like, it's so empowering, yeah. Anything else? Yes, Nini.
Thank you. So I'm curious. So you obviously think of the idea. So you pose, and then you make sure the camera is set up a certain way, and then somebody take the picture.
Yes.
And then you take a bunch of them, and then.
Yes, yeah. I have an idea. I talk with like the person who I'm gonna do it with, but I always give allowance for that person to move around, right? So like, because it would be so stagnant if like every time it's like, oh, okay, that's like people's like way of taking photographs. But I would be like, okay, so we're gonna do this gesture now, but direct me as like how I should do this. Boo works with me before, so like he knows like that's the way. I have a parameter, but then I'm so open for that person to come in and and I think like that conversation about authorship, right? It's like, yeah, is that like, does it mean like that's your photograph or not? But I think about it, I never claim work as like my own work ever, right? It's like, for me, it's always this collaborative kind of thing, but the idea always originate from me. So, in terms of, in terms of like what drives me, it's not the form really, but it's like the ideas that drives me, and then the kind of materials and the kind what you use to actually express that. That's what is really important to me. How the image, to tell you the truth, Nini, I actually don't look at my images. I really don't. The moment that I make my image, I'm done, I'm gone. I don't sit and like, oh, okay, let's just look at my image. I don't ever, I really like have never enjoyed that. My thing is like to look at the vast expanse of the work and to see how the ideas have actually evolved.
Can you tell us more about what you were going through in this time frame? You mentioned that you were finding out that you were a father at the time. You were in New York. You left New York. Why did you land in New Mexico? Like what was going on?
It was crazy. I think like coming down from like working in a nightlife in New York, it's just like, oh my God, I think like at some point, this becomes personal, but it's just kind of funny details. When you start waking up at like 4:30 in the afternoon, you figure you gotta leave, It's like at some point, it's like you're like 30 years old and you're like waking up 4:30 in the afternoon, getting ready to work at like, 7 o'clock. So like I think, and so that decision of just leaving to explore something that would be worthwhile, I think I started learning. I started doing photography like, maybe a year or two. And then I was just so fascinated, right? It was like so cool. And then New Mexico is like the best school the best school in the world at the time. And I was like, oh my God, I would just want to go to learn more. And you know what's even better? You allow up to 10 years to finish the program. I'm like, great, that's awesome, right? So like, that's why I went, it's like, you're supposed to write a book, and all of those. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So I think it was just purely survival, and I think I knew I wanted to do something more than just running nightclubs, I feel like, at that point, I think like I started learning about this visual language of like the camera, the photograph, and I just thought, you know what, I think now is you have this language, this tool, let's just really explore it. And so my intention was, I'm just gonna go to New Mexico, learn about photography, come back and just like do my nightclub things, and that's fine. But life, it's like you can't predict those things. So so that's kind of, it was weird too, the transition from New York. I think this is really important to talk about. The transition from New York to New Mexico, everything is organized in the grid. You can't see anything but like buildings, right? You go to the desert, it's like, wow, it opened up 180 degrees. You can see everything is scary. And so like, your perspective of space and the scale of your work and what you're thinking about completely change. Had I stayed in New York, I don't think I would do this kind of stuff because I really can't do it. But like, I think being in the desert where nothing that I do would matter to anybody in New York was just great. I just give myself like a certain kind of freedom to explore. But, I can tell you like, it was so dramatic to go from New York to go to New Mexico, where I'm like, I don't know how to even live. You know what I'm saying? It's like the Southwest is so different. So anyway, so like it was like actually really difficult, because I've never lived anywhere but like Saigon, Saigon, New York, and then you're just like, oh my God, there's a chicken running across like, the road. So so that was like really incredible.
I was wondering if you could talk more about the little plaques on
Yes.
the pieces and how the different like allusions to myth and like biblical imagery and stuff like that and literature, etc., plays into what you were thinking about.
Do you mean the plaques? Did you?
Yeah, like the names and how they correspond.
But it's just really kind of pretty much straightforward from like the objects, what I was thinking about, these kind of museum objects where like, especially during, the kind of 17th century, the Baroque, the Renaissance kind of work, when you see everything, it's like always there's a plaque with the title or what have you. And then, so that's what I was thinking about. In terms of the work, the expansive, how expansive it is, it covers, if you see Gulliver is definitely like it's like a myth, it's a Western myth, it's not like something like a classical painting. So that was like my sort of, my intention was actually to cover all of that, so like we can do Velázquez, we can do, a 17th century anonymous portrait to something that is like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or something. So I wanted to give myself that particular freedom, but the tag really is just to be authentic to the object. Yeah.
Is there also something kind of stereotypical about that too? Like in the same way that Western culture kind of makes a monolith of Asian culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
From very different Western ideas.
It looked like this, you know what I mean? It looked like this. It just looked like this, and so it's just like a completely. It's like going down to Chinatown to buy a fake bag. It looked like it. Everything looked like it, but it's not. You know what I mean? So so you're making this kind of like not authentic object into this believable thing. But like in my case, it's like to make it like, it's a real fake thing, So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pipo. And thank all of you for coming. and now we'll have some time to look at the show with a different perspective.
Thank you guys.